Hello everyone, my name is Naguura, and today I'm going to give you an overview of Moonkin in Prepatch for Dragonflight. So first of all, what changes during Prepatch? We will get our new talent system, so our class talents and our spec talents. We will lose our set bonuses, so that means for Moonkin we will no longer gain a Fury of a Loon when we enter Lunar Eclipse, and we will no longer get the cost reduction on our spells when we are in an eclipse. And we will keep our Legendaries and our Covenant abilities in Shadowlands content. We are not 100% certain if this means that we will also keep those effects in dungeons, in M+ dungeons, because certain M+ dungeons like Mechagon, Karasan, and so on, they're not technically speaking Shadowlands content, so we're not really sure if the Legendaries and Covenant abilities will work there. But we assume it will because it's part of the Shadowlands content, so I'm just gonna assume it will work there as well. Then let's talk about the main changes to Moonkin specifically, and let's go in game so I can show you the changes. Alright, so first of all, Starfall is now stackable. So that means there will not be a cooldown on Starfall anymore, and it will stack. So you can press Starfall as many times as you want. It's still attached to your character, and it's still the same radius as it was in Shadowlands. So if you look at my character, I can press Starfall once, I can press Starfall twice, and now it's just like a 2-stack on your buff bar, basically. That's a perfect change, awesome change. People have been waiting for this. Glad they did it. Then they changed our Mastery and our Eclipse. So in Shadowlands, Mastery and Eclipse worked together. So if you were inside Lunar Eclipse, you gain extra arcane damage from your Mastery within the Eclipse, and also from your Eclipse if you were in an Eclipse. Same with nature damage in Solar Eclipse. But they now separated it, so that means our Mastery is now going to be triggered through our dots. So if I have Moonfire on a target, I will do extra arcane damage to this target, no matter what eclipse I'm in, or if I'm out of eclipse, or wherever I am. And then our Sunfire will give us extra nature damage to the target, kind of like this conduit that we had, Fury of the Skies. Our Lunar Eclipse and our Solar Eclipse will still give us extra damage though, as well. So if you're in Lunar Eclipse, you will still do extra arcane damage, and if you're in Solar Eclipse, you will still do extra nature damage. So if you want the maximum amount of extra damage, you want to have your dots on the target, and you want to be in an eclipse. Now, I'm also quickly going to explain astral damage because this question always comes up and people are always a little bit confused about this. So astral damage is the combination of nature damage and arcane damage. So that means astral damage always gets affected by nature buffs and by arcane buffs. And if you have both at the same time, then they will be affected by both of them. So that means if I have a Moonfire on this target and it gives me 4% extra arcane damage, that means that my Starfire will do 4% extra damage because it's arcane damage. And also my Star Surge will do 4% extra damage because it's astral damage. My Wrath will not do 4% extra damage because it's nature damage, all right? Now, if I have Moonfire and Sunfire on the target, let's assume I would get 4% extra arcane damage and 4% extra nature damage from Sunfire, then my Starfire is buffed by 4% because it's arcane damage. My Wrath is buffed by 4% because it's nature damage, but my Star Surge is buffed by 8% because it's buffed 4% extra nature damage, and additionally also 4% extra arcane damage. All right, just to have that clear. Things that do astral damage for Moonkin is Star Surge, Starfall, Stellar Flare, Fury of a Loon, Moons, and some other spells as well, but these are like the main kind of spells. All right, then Star Surge no longer buffs our Eclipse. So if you guys know, in Shadowlands, if you were inside an Eclipse, any Star Surge you casted would basically buff our filler buff from that Eclipse. So if you're in a Solar Eclipse, your Wrath would do more damage and would generate more astral power, and each Star Surge would basically buff that effect. So the more you Star Surge in Eclipse, the more damage your Wrath will do. They removed that now, so that is no longer happening in Dragonflight. Then our Eclipses now can alternate. Wait, they don't longer alternate, sorry. So that means that you can enter whatever Eclipse you want. So for example, I can just consistently enter Lunar Eclipse. I'm in Lunar Eclipse now. Once I exit Lunar Eclipse, I can enter Lunar Eclipse again. And then again and again and again, as many times as I want. And I can also enter Solar Eclipse if I feel like it, right? But you will still have to cast the opposite filler to enter the Eclipse. So if I want to enter Lunar Eclipse, I have to cast 2 Solar Wraths. And if I want to enter Solar Eclipse, I need to cast 2 Starfires to enter it. So keep that in mind. All right, now Star Surge costs 40 Astral Power now instead of 30. They nerfed the Astral Power cost for it. I personally don't like this change, and I hope they will address it. I think it feels really bad if you don't have the 4-set bonus from Dragonflight, which of course we will not have in the pre-patch, and we will also not have for a decent amount of time in Dragonflight. And yes, the 4-set makes it a little bit less bad, but it still feels really bad, honestly, playstyle-wise, and I'm not a fan. So yeah, I hope they address this, but you will see how it feels like whenever we have the pre-patch, and you can, have your own opinion and see how you feel about it. Right, so now I'm gonna talk about talents. I'm gonna give you an overview of talents that I think you should be running, but keep in mind that the talents have not been worked on by the theory crafters for the pre-patch, because the pre-patch is very different to what Dragonflight is going to be, right? We have less talent points, we still have legendaries and conduits and soulbinds, covenant abilities that are all still enabled that interfere with our talent choices, while in Dragonflight, so those will be gone, right? So the theory crafters did not waste any time figuring out what the best combination of talents would be for pre-patch, because there's no content, no new raid, no nothing that would require us to fully min-max our choices. Therefore, they put all of their time and effort into the Dragonflight talents. So yeah, we don't know for sure what the best combination of talents is for pre-patch. But I personally will give you an idea of the talents, I will give you a rundown of the talents, and I will give you like a suggestion that I think is best for M+ and for raiding. Now keep in mind that this might be completely wrong. I didn't do any math to back up my claims. I'm just giving you my personal opinion on what I'm thinking is the best through feely crafty kind of thought processes, okay? So keep that in mind, just a disclaimer. In the end, you should be testing different talents, try around, test different stuff, because that's what pre-patch is for, so you can prepare for Dragonflight and test everything a little bit, right? Then, let's talk about legendaries, covenants, and conduit interactions with new talents. The way all of these things interact with each other is a bit weird. So because we have legendaries that give us the same effect as some of our talents, because they baked a lot of the legendaries into talents, and they also baked some covenant abilities into talents and conduit effects as well. For example, we have Convoke the Spirits now as a talent, which is a covenant ability for Night Fae. We have Balance of All Things, which is a legendary. Circle of Life and Death is a legendary. Wettle the Stars is Time-Worn Dreambinder, and so on and so on. And the rule of thumb for all of these double combinations is that the talent will always override anything else. That's the rule of thumb. If it works as intended, because I think Blizzard tried to fix almost all of those interactions to always have the talent override it. Now, for some things it might be bugged and it doesn't work, but for most Moonkin things that I have tested, it will always be the talent that overrides anything else. So keep that in mind. You do not want to run double of the same. You don't want to run a legendary, like you don't want to run Balance of All Things as a legendary and the talent as well, because the talent will be enabled and the legendary will be disabled. So you're basically wasting a legendary slot at that point. So just keep that in mind. And the same goes for conduits and for legendaries as well. So if you are running any conduits or any covenant abilities, then keep in mind to not run the same talent. Otherwise, you're disabling the thing that isn't the talent, right? Now I'm going to give you the rundown of the talents, but I have to give you one more disclaimer, and that is that there's currently a bug on PTR that possibly, very likely, makes it onto live servers, because it is Tuesday right now, basically a few hours before the pre-patch comes out. So I'm pretty certain this bug is going to make it to live servers, and they won't fix it in time, but they might be able to fix it a little bit like a few days after the patch came out. So I'm going to give you 2 different builds. One build with the bug in mind, and one build for whenever they fix the bug, right? Let me talk about the bug, I guess, before we go into the talent build. And it basically has to do with Syzygy, with Orbital Strike. So they renamed it to Orbital Strike. The old name is Syzygy, the new name is Orbital Strike. I'm not sure which name is going to make it to the live servers, but in PTR it's still Syzygy, I guess. So what this does, creates this like kind of targeting line from your character to your mouse, And this is whenever you press either Celestial Alignment or Incarnation. It will be attached to your cooldowns. And when you press it, it will create this huge beam of Fury Balloon, and it will do damage on all the targets that it hits. It will attach Stellar Flare to all the targets that it hits, and it will put you into Celestial Alignment / Incarnation, depending on what you have talented. All right, now this talent is bugged in a sense that it will basically bug out a lot of interactions with Celestial Alignment or Incarnation that you have. So what that means is that, for example, if you have Orbital Strike or Syzygy and Incarnation talented, then it will make Precise Alignment not work anymore. So this conduit here that makes our Celestial Alignment / Incarn last longer, it will not work anymore on your Incarnation if you have Orbital Strike and Incarnation talented. Additionally, it will make Elun's Guidance not work anymore. So if you have Syzygy, Incarnation, and Elun's Guidance, then Elun's Guidance will not work anymore because Syzygy is killing the interaction, basically. Then another really bad bug is that Arcanic Pulsar, your legendary, will not work anymore if you have Syzygy. And this is probably the worst bug because Arcanic Pulsar is, of course, our best legendary, and it would be really great to run Syzygy and Arcanic Pulsar at the same time. So yeah, if you have Arcanic Pulsar equipped and you have Orbital Strike / Syzygy enabled, then Arcanic Pulsar doesn't work anymore. All right, so keep that in mind. The reason why I give you 2 talent setups is because if these bugs wouldn't exist, then you would probably run Syzygy with Pulsar as a legendary in like an M+ scenario, but because it doesn't work, I'm going to give you a build basically assuming that it's going to stay bugged. So if it's bugged when it comes out, you can run that talent setup, and if it's not bugged anymore, once they fix it, you can run the other talent setup, all right? Okay, let's get into it. All right, so I'm gonna give you some like quote-unquote mandatory talents that I think are incredibly good. Again, you don't have to run any of that, but I'm just gonna give you a suggestion on quote-unquote mandatory things that I think are good, and then all the other talents are up to you, and you should play around with them, all right? So first of all, in the Druid tree, of course, Starfire and Star Surge are already mandatory by default. Then you, of course, take Moonkin form. Then you definitely want Nurturing Instinct because it increases your magic damage by 6%, so of course you want to take that. Now, you need 4 more points before you can go further down, and these 4 points are irrelevant. It's pure utility, so you can take whatever you want here. I'm gonna put it into random talents. Then you want Astral Influence, which increases your range by 5 yards. Then you want Sunfire, of course, and you almost always want Improved Sunfire as well, unless it's like a pure single target fight or everything is super spread out or whatever, right? So once you have these talents, you still need to spend 8 more points that are free for you to use. Everything is like not mandatory. It's all utility from here. So you can take this or that, you know, whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. Just pick and choose what you want. Then you want Lycara's Teachings because it gives you mastery, 6% mastery whenever you're in Moonkin form. And now you have another 3 points that are, again, pure utility. So you can use whatever you want here. All right. Now, going to the balance tree. Now, here the talents that I suggest are never mandatory. Like, nothing in the balance tree is, like, mandatory, right? Of course. But there are some talents that are a little bit better than others, I would say, from the numbers we know so far. So I'm going to give you some talents that, in my opinion, are somewhat mandatory, and everything else is kind of up to you. For a baseline build, you always pick Shooting Stars, and you always pick Starfall, okay? And of course, Eclipse, you have to. So these are 3 points that you just always take, kind of. You always take Solstice, really. And you almost always take Lunar Shrapnel because it leads into Starweaver and Weddle the Stars. And this is a talent we want as well. So these kind of outside talents you always kind of take. And for single target, you always take Stellar Flare because they changed it a little bit. It also procs your Shooting Stars now, additional to your Sunfire and to Moonfire. And Waning Twilight is a really good talent. It gives you like a 4% extra damage increase if you have 3 dots on your target, which Stellar Flare enables. So yeah, you always take this. Even on AoE, you almost always take this for 2 reasons. Number 1, it leads into Twin Moons. and Twin Moons is a really, really good talent for AoE. The only other way to get it is through Solar Beam. Now, of course, you can go through Solar Beam as well, but those two talents, Umbrella Intensity and Umbrella Embrace, are not the best talents for AoE, so it's not ideal to go through Solar Beam if you can avoid not taking Solar Beam. Of course, there's a lot of dungeons where you need Solar Beam, so yeah. But if you can avoid taking Solar Beam, then you kind of don't want to, because it's a pretty big damage loss. I still hope they change that, because it's incredibly annoying that Solar Beam is such a burden on your talent choices as a Moonkin. It's just a big damage loss if you take it, because of the position of it and the talents around it not being that strong for AoE. But anyway, so Stellar Flare, you almost always take. Then Lunarship now, you almost always take because of it leads into those talents, as I already mentioned. But here you have one more point before you can go down. And this talent point, I wouldn't say is necessarily mandatory for anything. You can pick and choose whatever you want. For a single target, you can put a point into Umbral Embrace, which turns one of your next filler casts into astral damage, so your Wrath or your Starfire. You can take Nature's Balance if you want some extra passive regeneration. You can take Umbral Intensity if you want. If you're AoEing, you can go Ethereal Kindling and so on. But for a single target, I'm just going to put the point into Umbral Embrace here. Then I'm going to put a point into Twin Moons. This is mandatory because you want to reach Celestial Alignment. So even on full single targets, you would take this, unless you want to go down this path, which I don't recommend. Then, for single target, I would also say that either Rattle the Stars or Starweaver is really good. You really want this because you also want Starlord. Now, Rattle the Stars is really good for Dragonflight. Once you have the 4-stat, I would still say it's good now as well. The problem is our Star Search now costs 40 Astral Power, and we won't really be able to keep this buff up that much for single targets. I'm not really sure how good it is for single target without the 4-set bonus of Dragonflight. Starweaver also pretty good for single target. You can pick and choose whatever you want here, I would say, for single. For AoE, I would definitely go for Rattle the Stars because it buffs your Starfall's damage, which is of course great, right? So here, pick whatever you want, or try both, I guess. Then you want Starlord for sure. Starlord gives you a lot more haste. It stacks up with Starfall and Star Surge. Then you want Orbit Breaker, which basically procs a full moon every 30th shooting stars tick. Then you almost always want Nature's Grace. It gives you haste when you exit an eclipse, and we exit eclipses all the time unless we are like in an incarnation cycle or whatever, so we constantly gain this haste buff, which is really nice. Now we have 5 more points. I personally really like Waning Twilight because it gives you 4% extra damage for having 3 dots up, and a 4% damage increase seems pretty nice, right? Now the problem is on AoE, you cannot so easily have it up on all targets. You can with Fungal Growth and with like Syzygy or whatever, but on single target you always have 3 dots in your target, right? So on single target I would definitely go for Waning Twilight. For AoE it's not necessarily mandatory, you can do other things, but yeah, for single target I would go for this for sure. And then from here on out you have 3 extra points left. And for single target, I personally think that these 3 points are kind of whatever you want to do. There's nothing like incredibly mandatory or super OP anymore from this point onwards. Now, because of the bug of Orbital Strike, I wouldn't probably take this talent, and I also wouldn't necessarily take Primordial Arcanic Pulsar because the Legendary is better. The Legendary procs it every 300 Astral Power instead of every 600. So in my opinion, I would just run the Legendary Arcanic Pulsar, and then not run either of those talents. But if you want to run a different Legendary, which you can, if you want to run Balance of All Things, for example, which is also a really good Legendary and frees up 2 talent points here, then you can run Pulsar here, right? It's up to you though, right? If you run this talent, then you would probably run Balance of All Things as a Legendary for single target, and then you just don't put points into Balance of All Things here. If you want to run Arcanic Pulsar, you don't put any talent points into this at all, right? So that's up to you. Then here, you can run Astral Communion, it's pretty good. 1 minute cooldown, 60 Astral Power again. You can run Nature's Balance if you want. You can run Soul of the Forest as well, making Wrath generate more Astral Power. And of course, Starfire also do more AoE damage. Then from here on out, you have 5 points left anymore at this point. So that's not a lot of points left for this bottom part. For a single target build, I would go with Power of Goldrin, I guess. I would go with Incarnation. Actually, I would go with Convoke, sorry. For a single target, I would go with Elune's Guidance. And then if you run Arcanic Pulsar, I would run Balance of All Things here to buff my Convoke, right? Because then whenever you proc Pulsar, you can cast Convoke. It gives you Balance of All Things so that your spells are critting and so on. It seems pretty good. If you're running Balance of All Things as a legendary and you're running Pulsar here, then you can still do the same thing if you want, but keep in mind you will proc Pulsar less often. And then you have one extra talent point that you can spend on something else if you want. You can run Circle of Life and Death, you can run New Moon. I wouldn't necessarily run Smolder. So yeah, if you run Balance of All Things, either Circle of Life and Death would be good, or New Moon if you want more Astral Power, I would say. If you don't want to run Convoke at all, and you want to run Pulsar, you can also go down this side. So you go Circle of Life and Death, Denizens of the Dream, and Friends of the Fae, which is an extra arcane and nature damage increase, plus the Denizens are doing a lot of damage as well. And then additionally, you can still go Convoke here if you want, or Incarn, depending on what you feel like. And yeah, this is kind of a build. These two builds are more single target, like either Denizens, or you go with Bolt / Elun's Guidance Convoke, right? Whatever your preferred choice is here. Now, this was more of a single target build. Now, let's talk about AoE. Now, if they fix the Syzygy bug, then I would 100% run Arcanic Pulsar as a legendary, and then run Syzygy as a talent. That would be, in my opinion, the best for sure, right? I would also run Incarnation here, and I would also run Elun's Guidance here, right? Because then you have every 2 minutes, you have Incarnation, you have your Syzygy available, and you have Pulsar that procs additionally. You get the cost reduction in your Pulsar procs, and it would feel really good, right? But of course, this is likely to be bugged. So, okay, let's finish the build in case it's not bugged, in case they fix it, okay? So, what else do you want to be running? So, you want to run Syzygy, you equip Arcanic Pulsar Legendary, you go Incarnation, you go Elun's Guidance, and then we have one more talent point left at the bottom. I think at the top, you still want to run Ethereal Kindling. You don't necessarily want Umbral Embrace. You can do this. You don't necessarily need Nature's Balance or Astral Communion either, which you can put into different points like Wild Mushrooms. I would probably run those. So I would remove this point, would remove this point as well. So now we have Wild Mushrooms and Fungal Growth. So an additional way of proccing Waning Twilight. Down here, I don't think any of these talents are actually very great. I don't think you need Friends of Fae, Circle of Life and Death. You can run it, it's pretty decent, but you have to refresh your dots so many times if you have that, which is a bit annoying. You can run Fear of Elune as well if you want. What would we remove then? I guess you can remove Power of Goldrin because it's not that great on AoE if you constantly Starfall. So yeah, something like that I would say you can run on AoE that would feel pretty nice. Circle of Life and Death is pretty good. Not sure if you would want to run that over maybe Fear of Elune. That's up to you, like just figure it out, okay? Just play around with the talents a little bit. This is something I would run probably in an unplus situation. Unless, of course, I need Solar Beam. If I need Solar Beam, I don't even want to think about that, honestly. It's scuffed. Because you lose so much stuff, right? If you need to run Solar Beam. You would have to like drop Waning or something, or I don't even want to think about it. Just don't play Solar Beam and hope that Blizzard fixes it. Right, so yeah, this is kind of what I would want to run if Syzygy is fixed, okay? If it's not fixed, then of course you don't want to run Syzygy because you can't run Arcanic Pulsar, and it also like interferes with all of the interactions. So what you can do is either you don't run any of the talents, like either you don't run Syzygy or Pulsar, and you equip your Pulsar Legendary, and then run all the other talents anyway, or you run Orbital Strike, but you don't run Incarnation, and you don't run Arcanic Pulsar Legendary. That's something that I think might also be kind of good, because keep in mind, if you run Orbital Strike, it breaks Incarn with Precise Alignment, but it does not break Celestial Alignment. So you can run this with CA, and you just don't go Incarn. You also don't go Convoke, because it's not very good on AoE. So I would probably run these talents. Elun's Guidance also doesn't work. Yeah, something like this. So now you have Orbital Strike, and a 2-minute CA cooldown only. And then Pulsar, the Legendary, doesn't work in combination with Orbital Strike. So I would probably run as a Legendary, very likely Circle of Life and Death, I would suggest. Because that's the only Legendary that really does anything at all. Because both, like this doesn't work. if it's bugged, of course. Then Timeworn Dreambinder realistically gives you Onyx Clear Vision and not the Timeworn Dreambinder buff, because we run Rattle the Stars. So if you equip Timeworn Dreambinder, we would have to change the talent to Star Weaver. So realistically, the legendary gives us Star Weaver, which is not great for AoE, of course, because it gives you a free Star Surge on like a lot of targets, which is not ideal. So yeah, Onyx Clear Vision not that great on AoE. Timeworn Dreambinder gives you Onyx Clear Vision, technically, so it's the same thing, these two legendaries. Balance of All Things, not that great for AoE, because of course Starfall does damage over time, and Balance of All Things gives you a very short crit window. It's not bad, like it's definitely like an okay legendary for AoE as well, but it's not great, right? So you can run Circle of Life and Death, which is basically the same as this talent here, so it would free up a point. So you can use this point into something else if you want, which is also not ideal though. It gives you 1 talent point, which we can't maybe even use in like a super amazing way. Balance of All Things would free up 2 talent points at least. So I guess what you could do is you could skill Circle of Life and Death and then equip Balance of All Things as a legendary, because then you gained 2 talent points, technically. That is something you can do, I guess. But yeah, play around with the legendaries a little bit. Play around with the talent trees. This is something that I personally would suggest if Syzygy/Orbit Strike is still bugged with the other thing. Otherwise, of course, run Pulsar and Syzygy. Alright, so these are my suggestions. Again, keep in mind, I'm only feely crafting this. I didn't do any math to back up any of my claims. I'm just completely making this up from my feelings that I have, from the testings I did, from what I logically think would be good or wouldn't be good, right? But in the end, you should be testing things. You should be getting used to all of these talents, because in tuning is still ongoing, so things might be changed as we go into Dragonflight, and then talents might all of a sudden be really good if they weren't good before. So you should really get used to all of the different kind of talents to make sure that you get a feeling for them in case they're actually going to be played in Dragonflight. And yeah, that's it. I hope it helped a little bit. For the Covenants, I didn't even speak about the Covenants at all, because Covenants are a bit scuffed. I think that you just run Venthyr, because Night Fae, you already have Convoke as a talent. Of course, you don't get the Nia buff, the mastery buff from Nia, but I still think the Ravenous Frenzy is probably better in most cases. Now, it's probably not better if you run Syzygy, because if you run Syzygy, your cooldown is now a 2-minute cooldown, but your Ravenous Frenzy is still a 3-minute cooldown, so that will be incredibly awkward. So I guess if you run Syzygy, I would probably run a different Covenant, either Night Fae or maybe even Kyrian. You could run Kyrian as well. Definitely wouldn't run Necrolord. But yeah, if you run the 3-minute cooldowns, I would definitely say Venthyr is the best choice, especially because Convoke gives you stacks within Ravenous Frenzy. I say Night Fae is an option as well. I would think that Night Fae could work in like AoE situations, if you run Syzygy, for example. But outside of AoE, I definitely don't think Night Fae is good. I think Venthyr is by far better for single targets, but you might as well play Night Fae, play around with it, do whatever you want, because again, in the end, these Covenants are going to be gone in Dragonflight, so it doesn't really matter, it's not that important. Just play whatever you feel like, play whatever Covenant you enjoy, and play around with the talents a little bit. But yeah, personally, I think that Venthyr is the best for single targets, and then for AoE, depending on what talents you play, I think you probably want to run something that isn't Venthyr, just because Syzygy makes it a 2-minute cooldown and then it's awkward. So you either want to play, I guess, Night Fae or Kyrian for AoE. I don't know. Just try it out. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope the rundown helped you a little bit to get an idea what you should be trying out and what you want to do. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can always join my Twitch channel over at twitch.tv/Naguura to ask any sort of questions that you might be having around this pre-patch, around Dragonflight. I'm of course going to make a really in-depth, more detailed guide for Dragonflight when it actually comes out. this is not supposed to be like a proper guide, as I said, because the math hasn't been done yet, but I will do a proper guide once the expansion comes out. I will also do a lot more Dragonflight guides, dungeon related, raid related, what to do during the first week of Dragonflight, what kind of things are new, what you should be doing to optimize your power gain, maybe even about professions, stuff like that. So subscribe to this channel if you're interested in more content like this. And thank you so much for watching. Have a nice, amazing rest of your day, and see you next time. Bye!